hey, didn't see you there. Oh, what's this? This is wood burning. If you want, I can show you how to do it. Just keep watching. Warning. The following video contains scenes of a person who claims to be a professional, but is really just some guy with access to a large number of hot and sharp things. Enjoy. Our first safety tip is you're going to want to tie up any loose hair or clothing. I know it doesn't have to do with the wood burner itself, but it's just as important. So if you take a minute, if you got long sleeves, roll them up, tuck any sweaters in, and tie up any long hair if you have it. Now that your beard's in a ponytail and your sleeves are out of the way, step number 2 in your safety checklist is going to be to make sure you have a solid, stable, and clean surface to work on. The last thing you want is your work's environment shifting on you and you burning yourself or some of your possessions with your wood burner. So I like to use this little brush. Just cleave anything clear. So now that you've got a clean, dry, and stable work environment and nothing that's going to fall in the way, let's get to know the tools a little better. So behind me here I've got 2 different kinds of wood burners. The first one, which is the more common that most people have, is a pen style wood burner. Now the pen style wood burner is usually just one you plug right into the wall. They have oftentimes an external power like this that they plug into. But this one, which is one of the cheaper ones, has a power supply right on the cord itself. So these types of wood burners require you to put tips in, and they often come with a variety of different ones. But the thing about these is the tip screws directly into the end of the burner itself. So it's versatile in that you can use a number of tips for different things. This one here is a universal tip, which means it's got a broad flat edge for doing shading and a fine profile for doing line work. But there's a number of more specialized tips that come with it, that came along with it. So there's a very broad one for shading exclusively. There's a calligraphy style tip and a few fine point tips that you can use when you're doing lining and things like that. This was my first type of wood burner, and I really like it. It's a great one for getting started with. The one thing you have to be very cautious of when using this is changing the tips should only happen when the tool is off and cool. It'll be very tempting. You'll be doing something and you'll want to change and use a different tip. Don't do it until the tip is all the way cool. Unless you have perhaps a set of pliers or something you can use to hold the tip, because it physically threads into the thing that heats it up. So you don't want to be touching that at all while it's on. The second type of tool is what I call a 2-pronged one. So you can see here how there are 2 points of connection for each of your different tips, because this one is interchangeable as well. The difference being this one has 2 set screws, one on either side, that allow you to better tighten the tip on you, because with the other one, an issue that arises with the tips that thread into themselves is the whole thing heats up. So when the metal heats up, it expands and it causes the tip to get loose, which can be really frustrating when you're trying to wood burn for more than like 20 or 30 minutes. Because it'll start to loosen, and unless you have pliers readily available, it's not easy to tighten on the go. And the more you tighten and the more you use pliers while it's hot and the metal is more malleable, you could affect the tip. So in my opinion, these ones are a better wood burner to use, and the one that I got I'm particularly happy about because it's got in the external power, there's room to plug in 2 different ones, so it came with 2 different ones. Now the power doesn't allow you to use both of them at the same time, so you can't wood burn with a friend. But what's cool about this is you can have 2 different tips. Like if you, what I tend to do is I have a universal tip, so it's like the first one that has a flat edge and a wide edge, and then the other one I'll have a fine point one. Because the one thing you can't do with the universal is make a circle, like a very small point. Uh, so you can have them both plugged in, ready to go, sitting in stands so that they're not touching anything, and then just toggle back and forth when you need to either put a very fine line or a point versus when you would like to shade or do something like that. So in my opinion, this is the probably safer and more versatile option, but it is a little bit more expensive, and you can do plenty of the same stuff with this one. Uh, but this one requires, the pen style requires an additional tool, which would be just pliers to switch between the two. This one obviously needs a screwdriver, but it comes with the wood burner. So our next piece of equipment is one of the arguably most important ones, and it's these guys. They're stands. So they, like the name implies, are used for standing your wood burner on when you're not using it. So if you just need to set down your tool, or you're going to switch tools so you are going to pick the other one up, it's good to have a stand readily available and to put it on your stand whenever you're not using it. Don't just set it down, especially ones like this where they're exposed all the way around. Don't set it down on your hardwood table. The cool thing about the pen ones is oftentimes they'll come with this little radius that's meant for you to sit down so that the hot tip never touches whatever it's sitting. So that is a kind of makeup for it. This one doesn't necessarily need a stand. These ones do. These ones are a lot easier to use, and they're safer to change the tips in and out of. So they're both good. But the overarching safety tip for both of them is make sure you're not changing the tips while the machine is on, and make sure you shut the machine off when you're not using, like when you're not around, and that you have somewhere safe to set it, like one of these stands, or my first stand I just kind of made out of a coat hanger that I bent into the shape that works. So anything to keep it away from anything flammable when you're not using it is important. So to turn on this particular pen style wood burner, I've got it plugged in up over here where you probably can't see. But the cord itself has this dial on it. Now, when you're starting out, I recommend, if you have a wood burner with an adjustable heat, that you start at about half heat. So all you have to do is turn it on, and this will start heating up. You'll want to let it sit for about 5 minutes so that it heats up. I'm not going to use this one today, but that's I just wanted to turn it on to show you. You'll know it's ready to use when you can set it down on your wood and count to two, like 2 Mississippis, and you can see smoke. That's usually a good indication that it's hot enough to use. Our next guy is a little bit more complicated. So as you can see, the burner itself is totally separate from the machine. So with the power off, you can plug in each of your 2 wood burners that you're going to be using. And they have this little threaded plug to keep them from slipping out while you're using them, which is also a nice safety feature. Now with 2 wood burners plugged in, and my kit happened to come with 2 separate stands, you're safe to turn on the power on the side here, and then turn up the power to your desired temperature. Now when you're just starting out, you're going to want to start in the mid-20s on this machine, but which is about, we'll just say, medium heat until you're used to the tool. So I'm going to let this heat up, and I'll show you how to get started on the wood. Now we've been sitting for about 5 minutes, so we should be good and hot, but just to test, I'm going to go 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. See how the smoke has started to come out? We've left a nice black mark here. That's a good sign that we're at an appropriate temperature to start using. So, for people who are new, I want you to get the hang of using both sides of this multi-tool tip. One side is obviously going to be for doing fine lines, whereas the other is going to do a much better job of your shading. Now, as a small exercise, what I think is best for a lot of people to get used to their wood burning tool before you start is I like to use the flat edge and do your best to draw 4 very even lines. Making a box. Now try and shade your box in one solid tone. Do this 4 or 5 times, trying to go from lighter to darker. See how using your tool works when it comes to trying to shade an area all at once. Something you'll discover is that you have to almost get slower the more you work it, because the wood is cold and your tool is hot, and the tool is a lot smaller than your wood. So when you first touch the tool to the wood, it's about as hot as it's going to be. Then it starts to cool off because of the wood. So as you make straight lines or shading, you have to slow down as you go in order to keep a consistent shade. So this is kind of a difficult thing to get the hang of when you're trying to get a certain type of gradient. But another thing you can practice is trying to go from light to dark, or when you're trying to make something have a gradient. It's easy, if that's what you're attempting to do, to just stay at the same pace. Another little tip is a lot of wood burning stands come with this little spongy bit inside. Now as you wood burn for a while, because you're essentially creating char marks on all the wood, what's going to happen is you're going to get a little bit of buildup of carbon on the end of your tool. It's natural. It doesn't happen right away, so if it doesn't happen, don't be worried. But it will happen over time, and especially as you use your tool more, it'll eventually kind of cake on there. The thing with this sponge, or a piece of Scotch-Brite works too, is it gives you the opportunity to kind of get rid of that stuff somewhere where you're not going to wreck your work. Break out your test piece of wood and just make sure you're not leaving any marks you don't want to before you get back to your regular piece. Okay, now before I finish up this dragon for you, I got the last 2 safety tips before I get too carried away. The first one is, when you're wood burning, if you have to leave where you are for any reason, just shut it off. It takes 5 minutes to heat back up. You're not going to lose time. A lot of things can happen with a hot stick when you leave it unattended. So if you got to go to the washroom, or take a roast out of the oven, or wrestle with your brother in the hallway, just unplug your wood burner. Keep it away from anything that might run into it. Don't try and teach your dog. It's not going to go well. The last tip is just kind of know what you're burning. You can use a wood burner on leather, on bone, on wood, obviously, but depending on the type of material you're using, it might determine the temperature and how careful you need to be when using your tool. I would stay away from pressure treated woods, anything that might have chemicals on it. Really wet wood is not necessarily super dangerous, other than you don't know what it's wet with, but it will ruin the effect if you try and do something too wet, because it'll just steam. It won't actually burn the surface properly. If you're using bone, make sure it's treated. If you're using leather, again, just be cautious when you're doing these kinds of things. Now, I'm going to get back to what I was doing earlier. If you stick around long enough, I got a special treat for you at the end for anyone else interested in a super secret tip. So, hang in there. Okay, now before my camera dies, the last step. Once you've wood burned your beautiful masterpiece, you're going to want to finish it somehow to protect the wood. Now, the simplest way is a polyurethane or some kind of clear coat so it looks exactly the way it does. Um, but what I like to do sometimes, because it is wood and you may want it to look nice, is you can use a paintbrush and some wood stain and add a little bit more depth to what you've already done or some different colors. But because the wood acts kind of like paper, what I'm going to do to this guy, and what I also recommend, is you can use pencil crayons or acrylic paints, anything you would put on paper or canvas. Because I want this one to look a little bit like the actual card, I'm going to go ahead and color it with some pencil crayons. But really the finishing's totally up to you, depending on what you're using it for. If you stole your mom's wooden spoon out of the kitchen to wood burn, you'd probably want to treat it with some kind of oil that is food safe. I hope you enjoyed and maybe learned some. Maybe you think I'm just an idiot with a torch. So, the super special tip slash trick that I was going to show you at the end is one of the coolest tools you can add to your pyrography arsenal is a blowtorch. So these are obviously a lot more dangerous. They have a very hot open flame at one end. It's better recommended that you use eye protection. You don't want to do this for very long in like an enclosed space because the fumes can be bad. If you're under the age of 25, get an adult to help you with this, because I've seen many people hurt themselves with torches. They now have handheld pens that use a small butane torch to do a similar effect, or if you had like one of those torch lighters you can get at Canadian Tire. They do an excellent job of shading and creating gradients. So because the area of flame is so large compared to a wood burner, you can get away, you can make a much larger area much darker and much quicker. So utilizing the torch can help you do things like I like to use it along the edges of pieces of wood that I burn, or in places where there's going to be a large dark background. It takes away a lot of the time from trying to get an even look with the pointed tool. The torch can really speed things up a bit. And if you've got the small handheld one where you can control the size of the flame, it's a lot easier to create softer shading in a lot of places. So, secret weapon to wood burning, a torch.